Reykjavik in summer felt like a dream stretched too thin to end. The sun barely dipped below the horizon, leaving a pale silver light smeared across the sky even at midnight. The streets carried the salt breath of the Atlantic, mixed with the bitter-sweet scent of coffee drifting from cafes that never seemed to close. Emil Arvidsson lived on the edge of the city, where the view stretched out over Faxaflói Bay and the calls of seabirds filled the dawn. His workshop, a squat wooden building with a roof gone mossy, smelled perpetually of stone dust and linseed oil. Emil was 32, a stone carver by trade, a solitary man by choice. His life was measured in the ringing of hammer against chisel, the gradual revealing of shape from formless rock. On a sharp, bright morning in early June, a man appeared at his workshop door. He was tall, wrapped in a gray wool coat despite the mild weather. His hair was silver, his beard neatly kept, and his eyes, ice blue, missed nothing. "I am Bjorn Arnarsson." He introduced himself in a deep, careful voice. "I have a commission for you. A statue, 2 meters tall. It will stand in my family's garden." Emil nodded. "What stone would you like? I can source basalt granite." No, Bjorn interrupted. "The stone will be provided. It is unique." 2 days later, a truck arrived carrying a single block. Emil stood staring at it long after the driver left. It was unlike anything he had worked with, a massive slab of gray-green stone flecked with tiny silver sparks, as though frost had been frozen inside it. When the sunlight touched it, the flecks glimmered faintly, as if with their own light. By day, the stone was only beautiful. By night, it began to speak. The first time it happened, Emil was at his bench, long past midnight. Tools scattered the pale glow of the summer night spilling through the window. A sound brushed his ear, soft, almost like wind threading through narrow cliffs. He thought it was the sea. Then he realized it was coming from the stone. Heart knocking, he leaned closer. The sound grew clearer, a woman's voice, faint but urgent, speaking in an Icelandic so old he understood only fragments. "Hjálpadu mér, adur and vetur kemur. Help me before winter comes." Emil jerked back the stool, scraping the floor. He didn't sleep that night yet. When dawn came, he found himself drawn to the stone again. The voice was silent in daylight. But that evening, as the shadows stretched, it returned. "Eg alfadis, lokast I steini." "I am alfadis, locked in stone." Her tone was not ghostly, but alive and desperate. The third night, Emil spoke back. His voice sounded strange in the empty workshop. "If you are real, tell me what you need." There was a pause. "Then take me home. To Esja before the first winter sun. Then the gates will open. If not, I will turn to dust." A cold ripple slid down Emil's spine. Esja loomed across the bay, blue and solemn, a mountain wrapped in more legends than any in Iceland. If he was to believe her, if this meant crossing into something far beyond his quiet life. But the voice's plea had already wound itself into him like a hook. The next day, Emil went to the Saga Museum in the city. Inside the dim hall lined with wax figures of ancient warriors, he found an elderly librarian named Sigridur, who tended the archives of Icelandic folklore. He described the stone in detail. She listened without interrupting, then pulled a brittle leather-bound book from a high shelf. "There is a tale," she said, "of the elven fortress of Esja. It fell centuries ago in a storm of magic. Some say its stones were scattered across the land. A few still hold the souls of those trapped inside." Her eyes sharpened. "If you hear a voice, Emil, you have stumbled onto a secret. Mortals rarely survive." That night the stone spoke again. "Will you help me?" Emil stared at the shimmering flecks in the rock's surface. Somewhere in there, if she spoke true, was a woman's soul. "Yes," he said finally, "I will." But a shadow of doubt lingered. He had not yet met Bjorn's reaction, and some deep instinct told him the man would not simply let his unique stone be taken away. The voice returned with the thin light of the not-quite night. "Will you help me?" Emil rested his palm against the cool, grainy face of the stone. He felt nothing, no vibration, no warmth yet. The sound traveled through him. "Yes," he said, "but tell me who you are." The answer came slowly, like a hand reaching across water. "Alfadis, daughter of the Lodestar court. When the fortress of Esja fell, the stones scattered like seeds. I was bound to this fragment in the collapse. How do I free you? Not by breaking." A hint of amusement, tired but real. "Chisels cannot cut what is bound by oath. You must carry me to where the fortress stood. There is a seam in the world there, and when the first winter sun crests the seam opens. That is the only door. That's months from now. Your seasons are mercifully patient." A pause. Men seldom are. As if summoned by the word, a black car rolled into the gravel outside his workshop the next morning. Bjorn climbed out with the air of someone used to thresholds bending aside for him. Two other men stepped out after him, broad-shouldered, silent. "How goes the work?" Bjorn asked. "It's unusual," Emil said, choosing truth without detail. "The grain is unlike basalt. I need time to study how it takes a tool." "You have 8 weeks," Bjorn said. "As we agreed. I may need more. Time is expensive." Bjorn's gaze flicked beyond Emil to the stone and lingered with something almost like hunger. "Be careful with it." He turned to go then, as if remembering a rehearsed kindness, added, "I look forward to your art taking shape." When they drove off, the workshop felt smaller. Emil pushed the door shut and slid the bolt. That night, he sat in the half-light with the stone. "Who is he?" he asked the whisper. "A name I do not know," Alfadis said. "But the taste of his family is in the stone. Taste old promise, old theft." He could hear Sigridur's words again, "A few stones hold souls." He returned to the museum the next day and found her at a table mending a map. "You were right," he said. "There's a story inside the rock." Sigridur sighed as if a door in a house had opened by itself. She pulled another book, this one illustrated with naive drawings. Centuries ago, she said, there was a merchant Arnar of Vide. He trafficked in whatever brought silver into his house. He stole a stone from a cairn at Esja against his guide's warning. The guide vanished that winter. Arnar's ship foundered with a cargo of ore. In spring, a sickness took 2 of his sons, and the third went mad. Before he died, Arnar wrote that anything taken from Esja must be returned, or the taking would take in turn. Arnar, Emil repeated. Sigridur's finger tapped the page. The name repeats itself in Iceland like a wave repeats on shore. But Arnarsson is Bjorn's name, yes. Emil nodded, a knot forming where his ribs met. He's given me the stone to carve for his garden. With a soul inside it, Sigridur's lips thinned. Then he is not merely a fool. He is a fool with lineage. How do I return it properly? Sigridur studied him for a time, weighing. You'll need 3 things for the passage to hold water from a rift that divides the world. Thingvellir will do. Fire that remembers the earth's blood, a coal kept from dormant lava, and a gift of name. Not yours. Hers. I don't know her true name. Only Alphadis. That may be enough, Sigridur said, voice softening. Elves have many names. The naming itself is the gift. But listen, Emil. The old stories say the land has guardians, landvetir, that watch the island's compass points. If you go where the seam is thin, you go near them. You must pass respectfully. How do I do that? Walk. Ask. Don't lie. A faint smile. Sound like anyone you know, Emil left with a corked jar, a tin for coals, and a prayer he didn't know how to aim. Night after night, the whisper thickened into conversation. He learned the rhythms of her voice when it carried a smile, when it frayed with a thread of fear. What was your fortress like, he asked once just before dawn. Like a sky built from stone. We hewed halls inside the mountain's heart. We feasted by the light of moss and iron stars. We kept watch over the passes so storms would not eat the sheep. A pause he felt more than heard. We danced when the aurora combed our hair. What happened? The whisper curled small. A pact was broken. Someone took a stone, only one, but the taking opened a seam in the wrong place. The mountain tried to close it. We were in the way, Arnar Emil said. If that is the thief's name, then he has written it into me. A truck rumbled on the road outside. Emil flinched. He had begun to work during the day with the doors closed and the blinds down. He told himself it was to protect the stone from curious eyes. The truth, the more he listened, the less he could bear the thought of strangers in the room. He set aside the chisels and worked with rasps and sand to thin the crust of stone in one place, praying he was not doing harm. Not to break, only to ease. He took off layers the way a patient man peels an apple with a single spiral of skin. Under the grit, his fingers went numb, not from cold, but from too much listening with the nerves. He stopped when a vague suggestion of cheekbone and brow emerged, no more than a ghost of a face. That night the voice came brighter, as if it could find him easier through the shallowed stone. You are careful, Alphadis said. Carefulness is not common in the world of men. I work with things that don't forgive arrogance, Emil said. Then we are kin in craft. He slept a little after that, and dreamed of halls lit by iron stars that were only flecks in rock, and of a woman whose face he could not see, only the outline of a crown shaped like a fern. The second week, Bjorn returned. He did not knock. He moved through the workshop with the confidence of a man walking in his own house. It looks unfinished, he said, stopping before the stone. I'm studying. The grain is different from what the eye suggests. Stone is stone, Bjorn said. You hired a carver so you wouldn't have to pretend that. Bjorn's gaze sharpened. Then surprisingly he laughed. Fair enough. I hired you because people say you listen to rock. Keep listening and give me something worthy. What is it for? Emil asked. This statue. Why this stone? You could have bought marble that glows like snow. My family has a summer party, Bjorn said. A dedication. My daughter, she's been unwell. We've had bad years. I want something enduring in the garden to mark the turn. A human reason. It struck Emil where he had not expected to be vulnerable. The shape of a little girl formed in the space between them, a figure he had not been told existed. I'm sorry, he said, because the first thing to say to pain is always small. Make it beautiful, Bjorn said, and for a heartbeat the man's polish slipped. Make it good. When he left, the room was loud with silence. Emil stood very still, hearing his own blood in his ears. He spoke to the whisper that night. He has a daughter. So did Arnar Alfadis said. That was centuries ago. Grief does not keep a calendar. Do you harm anyone if you go home? Emil asked. He despised the question as soon as it left his mouth, but he needed the answer. The world will right a tilt, Alfadis said. Sometimes when the table is set right, a cup falls that had been balanced wrong. He thought of a girl in a garden. Then perhaps the writing will spare her, Alfadis said softly, as if she had been listening where his thoughts bent. I am not a curse, Emil. I am a person caught in a machine of oaths. He worked until his shoulders burned. Sand turned to mud with sweat under his palms. When he slept, he dreamed not of halls, but of a gate made of ribs of basalt, and an ocean pouring through. Sigridur called him the following afternoon. You should come, she said. I found something that doubles as a warning. At the museum, she laid a letter beneath the lamp. The ink had browned with centuries. This is a copy, she said. The original is too fragile. To my sons and their sons, the script clawed across the page. If the stone is held far from Estja, it sings, and the song draws both fortune and misfortune. The longer it is kept, the more fortune sticks to the keeper's hands, and the more misfortune flies to the hands of those near him. If it is returned, the song settles into the mountain, and both balances rest. If it is carved, the song is cut into pieces and cannot be healed. Emil stared at the line until it blurred. If it is carved, cannot be healed. I wondered why he insisted on providing the stone, Sigridur said. Now I suspect he wants you to cut it so it's never whole enough to return. He said his daughter is unwell, Emil murmured. If he believes the stone brings fortune. Fortune can be the cruelest story we tell ourselves, Sigridur said, especially when we're drowning. Then I cannot carve it. No, she agreed. You must carry it. It weighs 1/2 ton. Sigridur's smile was feral and grandmotherly all at once. You won't carry it alone. They planned in whispers over tea. He would gather the 3 things: rift water from Thingvellir, a coal from a cooled lava field whose heart still kept red memory, and a name gift. The last weighed on him the most. Ask her, Sigridur said. Ask how she calls herself when the mountain is listening. That night, Emil stood before the stone with a notebook open like a little sail. What is your name when the mountain is listening? You are braver than a man with a hammer. Alfadis said, the smile in her voice again. You ask instead of strike. Silence then. When the mountain listens, I am called Asa of the lodestar, child of the mosslight. That is the name that binds me to the halls that were. He wrote it down carefully. Asa, he repeated, and the shape of it felt like flint struck in his mouth. Do not squander it, she chided gently. Names are keys, but keys dropped are things children swallow. I'll keep it safe. You keep everything safe, she said, and something in the words warmed him as no hearth could. Twice Emil drove out of the city. The first time he stood on the cracked plain of Thingvellir, where the earth parted itself to show the seam between plates. Water there was so clear it looked like air choosing another way to be. He filled the jar and whispered something that felt like thanks to no one in particular, and to the black walls on both sides. The second time he walked into a carpeted lava field at dusk. Lichen made the ground look like the surface of the moon. In a sheltered hollow he found an old campfire ring, where glassy scoria still held a sleep warmth. He built a small fire from drifted twigs and let a coal wake. He pinched it between tongs and dropped it into the tin where it glowed faintly like a captured patient eye. Back in Reykjavik, he found 2 men weighting the same silent bricks that had come with Bjorn. Our employer would like to see the progress, one said. Tomorrow, Emil replied, trying not to think of, if it is carved, the song is cut into pieces and cannot be healed. Now. He locked the tin and the jar into a drawer when they turned their backs. The men followed him into the workshop and looked around with the expression of people in a church they didn't mean to respect. Emil stopped by the stone body angled so they couldn't inspect the place where he'd thinned the face. Slow going, he said. Make it faster, the taller man said. We'll be checking in more often. He left as soon as they did to driving to Sigurdur's flat, with a bag packed in a way that made him feel like a thief. She let him in, took one look at his face, and nodded. Tonight, then, she said. Tonight, he echoed, and wondered what line he had crossed 9 days ago, when a whisper first curled into his ear. They waited until the low hour when silence grows moss. Sigridur brought a cart meant for moving pianos and a wooden cradle her grandfather had used to ferry fish. They bundled the stone with blankets and ropes, as if dressing a child for a storm. Emil left a note on the bench that said, "I cannot carve a living thing." They wheeled out across the gravel, the cart's rubber tires barely whispering. The city dozed. Above the rooftops, the mountain watched. Halfway to the truck, a voice cut the air. Going somewhere, Bjorn stepped out of shadow by the hedgerow, hands in his coat pockets, as if out for an insomnia walk. The two men materialized behind him like punctuation. Emil's breath froze, then thawed on anger. "You didn't knock," he said. "This stone is mine," Bjorn answered. "Paid for twice, once to acquire, once to set in your care. It isn't yours to own." "You are a craftsman," Bjorn said, a tiredness undercutting the iron. "Not a priest. A craftsman knows when his material is a person." For a heartbeat, something flickered in Bjorn's face. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "I am not the villain you need me to be. My daughter's lungs are sick. The air cuts them. We've tried every doctor between here and Copenhagen. We've lit every candle. The only thing that has changed is this stone in my garden in my house. Do not take from me the one thing that has leaned luck our way." "Fortune and misfortune stick and fly," Emil said quietly. "That's not healing. That's theft from the air. Do you think I care what you call it if she can breathe?" Sigridur spoke, then stepping forward like a force of weather. "I knew your grandfather," she said. "He was a hard man under the fur and the fish. He learned too late that some things bite you back after you bite them. Be wiser." "Wisdom is a story old people tell the young to make them settle," Bjorn said. "I won't." They stood in the soft, sleepless light with the stone between them like an animal that might bolt. A window across the street opened and closed. A gull cried, believing everything belonged to it. Emil felt the moment closing like a fist. He did not know he would speak until he heard his own voice, "Come with us, then." Bjorn blinked. "What, come with us?" "See where it goes. If nothing happens, I will carry it back myself. If something happens that you cannot deny, you'll let it stay." Bjorn considered. Then he surprised all of them. "I'll bring the car." They drove out of the city in a small convoy, Bjorn's black car leading Emil's truck, following with the stone lashed in its cradle, Sigridur riding shotgun and gripping a strand of prayer beads that looked more like old buttons than anything holy. The road to Estja unwound along the water. The mountain grew by increments, a darkening thought. They parked where the trail began by a signboard with maps and warnings. A wind came down off the slope, smelling of iron and wet wool. Emil looked up. He had walked here before on clear Sundays. It had always felt on those hikes like a place you could hear the earth think. Tonight it felt like the earth had already decided. They moved carefully, the cart bumping over rock, the stone heavy but compliant, as if it knew it was going home. Twice Emil felt the sensation of being watched, not the prickle of human eyes, but the clean attention of large old things. At a crossing, where the trail narrowed, between two lava buttresses, Sigridur halted. "Here," she said. "Pour the rift water." Emil uncorked the jar and trickled the cold, clear stream over the stone, his fingers shaking. He murmured Asa's name once, only once, into the wet grain. The air tasted sharper. The men who worked for Bjorn shifted uneasily as if their boots had grown teeth. At a second place, a hollow where the wind made a sound like a long-held note, Emil set the tin down and opened it. The coal inside still smoldered like a memory that refused to be talked out of itself. He lifted it with the tongs and touched it gently to the stone as if knighting it with ember. "Now what?" one of the men asked, voice too loud. "Now we ask," Sigridur said, "for what to be allowed through." The path bent to reveal a shallow amphitheater of basalt columns, a natural organ pipe frozen mid-song. The ground in its center was bare and dark, as if centuries of gathering had worn it smooth. Emil knew, without being told, that this was the place. He set the stone down. The whisper inside it steadied, then swelled. He realized with a tremor that he had never before heard Asa breathe. Now he did one intake of air, as if she'd climbed a long hill. "We are close," she said. "What do I do?" Emil asked. "Stand with me," she murmured. "Name me to the mountain. Offer what it asks." "What will it ask? Something you can afford to lose," she said gently, "and something you cannot." "I'm a carver," he said hoarsely. "My hands. I did not say what it would take. I said it would ask." The amphitheater held sound, the way a bowl holds water. When Emil spoke, his voice sounded like two voices, one larger than the other. "Asa of the lodestar," he said, "child of the mosslight, I name you to the mountain." The wind paused. The surf at the bay's edge seemed to draw breath. In the gap between that drawing and the exhale, a deep note sounded, not heard so much as felt, through bone and fillings. One of Bjorn's men swore softly. The other crossed himself with a sudden fervor that argued with his earlier skepticism. The ground in the center of the amphitheater darkened, then paled. A seam appeared as if someone had run a fingernail through clay. Light welled up from below, not bright but deep, a slow dawn in reverse. "Good Lord," Bjorn whispered, not to God, but to the event. Sigridur nodded once, tears on her face, an old woman who had waited her life for the moment when her stories changed from maybe to is. A shape rose in the light, not a body, but the idea of one, like the first sketch a sculptor makes when the stone shows a hint of what it wants to be. It reached for the block as a hand reaches for a hand across a crevasse. The mountain asked. It did not use words. It placed a question in Emil's mouth the way a parent places a spoon. "What will you give, stone listener?" He thought of all the things he could afford to lose, and all the things he could not. He thought of the girl he had never met, not breathing right in a house full of silver. He thought of his mother's voice counting the beats of a lullaby he could still hear if he concentrated hard enough. He thought of the feel of weight traveling through steel, through his palm into rock. He answered. "Take from me the memory of being alone," he said, and felt immediate terror at the audacity. "Take the isolation I have made into a virtue. Let me keep my hands. The mountain is old. It has seen bargains made like fishing nets, like planks." It considered the offer. The seam brightened. A second question rose smaller, but sharp. And the thing you cannot spare, Emil closed his eyes. He found it. It was not his hands. It was the face of the first person he had ever loved, the boyhood friend who'd taught him to carve soap with a pocket knife. The only one who had said, "It's all right to make the world quiet with your work." That friend had drowned one October when they were 19. Emil had taught himself not to think of him, then had come to rely on the thinking. The memory was a stone in his pocket he rubbed when the day felt counterfeit. To give that up felt like turning his coat inside out in a storm. He opened his eyes into the seam's light, and take his throat closed. He had to push the words out. Take the memory of Jon's face. The light bent not in refusal, but in acceptance that felt like the bowing of an old tree under good snow. "Wait," Björn said, stepping forward involuntarily. Why must he? The mountain was not listening to him. The mountain was listening to the naming. The light reached into the stone. It found the thinning Emil had carved with sand and patience. It poured itself through that place like water through a straw. The whisper was suddenly a voice. Not thin, not far full and near. Emil Asa said, and his name in her mouth felt like a hand on the back of his neck in winter warm and guiding. Let go, he let go, not of the cart handle, of the tightness that had kept him like a ship in a harbor too long. Something in him slipped its rope. It felt like falling without fear. Something else went cleanly, like a thread cut with good scissors. He tried out of reflex to remember Jon's face, and found only the shape of a kindness without features. He staggered and braced himself on the stone. His hands still worked. He wept once, a single shocked sound. From the lit seam, a figure rose like a woman standing up from a pool. She was stone and not stone light, and not light. She wore a circlet that was only when stared at the memory of Fern. Her eyes were river-colored and full of a tired joy. Asa. Not a princess from a painted card, but a person who had been inside a small space for a very long time and was now tasting air properly. Sigurdur dropped to a knee, an old instinct. Emil stayed standing because every tendon in him commanded him to hold if anything else broke. Do not bow, Asa said gently to Sigurdur. You kept my name. I kept it warm, Sigurdur whispered. Björn took a step forward and then another as if someone else moved his boots. His men did not move at all. They had shifted into the statues they had never believed they could be. My daughter Björn said hoarsely. If you can do this, if you can do anything, Asa turned her head toward him with a slowness that was more grace than delay. You are the grandson of theft, she said not cruelly. You took a thing that wanted to be left. You are heavy with wanting. But you are also heavy with love. Björn's mouth trembled. She wakes at night and cannot catch the end of a breath. She looks at me as if I am a door that will not open. I would. He swallowed. His voice shattered into the simplest thing a person can say. Please. Asa looked at Emil. May I take something I can return? Yes, he said, not knowing at all what that meant and knowing completely. She touched his forearm. He felt a slight draining as if his skin had been a lake and a small bucket removed a measure. She turned and walked to Björn until she stood a pace away. She raised her hand and did not touch him. When she lowered it, the air smelled briefly of time baked by sun. Go home, she said. Tell your daughter to open the window when she sleeps. Tell the sea to come in. Tell the rock under your house to stop leaning so hard on her dreams. You will find a little blue stone on your kitchen threshold in the morning. Put it where she keeps her hairpins. It will keep balance where she keeps breath. Bjorn stared as if he were the one pulled from stone. "Thank you," he said, voice very small. He looked at Emil as if trying to plot a line on a chart in a storm. "Thank you." Emil nodded. He was no longer interested in where gratitude landed. He was trying to feel the outline of the place in himself where something had been. It hurt. It also released him from a duty he had mistaken for devotion. The seam's light rose and fell like a sleeping chest. It had the patient rhythm of winter sun, slow, inevitable. Asa looked back down into it. She looked like a woman standing on the lip of a ship about to go. She looked for the first time frightened. "You can stay," Emil said, the sentence surprising him. "If you want." A smile blew across her face like a weather change. "I was born there." She nodded toward the seam. "It knows the names I don't remember. It will put my stone pieces back into one singing." "I am tired, Emil." Her eyes found his with a directness that felt like weight on his sternum. "But if I go all the way in, I may not come back out here." He didn't know until that moment that he wanted her to come back out here. The wanting landed lightly and completely like a gull deciding which post is its post. Then this he said before he could reconsider his capacity for brave things: "If there is a night when your gates open and my feet can find them, call. If there is a day when my hands can help and not harm, call. If there is a place for a stone listener to listen, their call." Asa took his hands. His palms were rough with 1,000 hours of persuasion, and he was suddenly absurdly ashamed of them, as if they were clumsy language. She lifted his left hand and pressed her mouth to the scar by his thumb, where a chisel had once bitten. Heat moved from her lips into the scar and stayed. "Then I will call," she said. "And if you hear a small bell under the ice of your glass, if you see a ribbon of green when the sky is black, listen harder." She stepped backward into light. The seam welcomed her without a splash. The amphitheater filled its lungs. The light drew down inside stone the way a candle flame sucks itself out when a glass is dropped over it. Silence. Then the wind remembered its chore and began again. Bjorn made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. He wiped his face without embarrassment, a man who had been unmade and remade in the space of a day. He offered Emil his hand. Emil took it. It felt like granite warmed in sun. "I'll send men for your cart in the morning," Bjorn said. "You won't send anyone," Sigridur said briskly, reclaiming the briskness of her breed. "We are perfectly capable." She looked at him more gently then. "Go home to your daughter. Open the window." He went. They secured the empty stone. It felt lighter now, or perhaps they had simply put down something they had been carrying inside their bodies, and so everything else was lighter by comparison. On the drive back, Sigridur dozed, her head bumping the window. Emil kept one hand on the wheel and one wrapped around the memory of where Asa had kissed the scar. He pulled over once near the water and got out to stand under the sky's pale wash. He called to mind Jon's face and found only the sound of a pocket knife cutting soap, only the feeling of being told it was all right to be the way he was. He cried again, quietly. Then he put his hands on the hood of the truck and let the steel cool his skin. When he reached his workshop, he found the note he had left for himself without realizing it, the one scrawled in the margin of his notebook. "Carve the world as if it can answer back." He slept on the floor beside the cart. He dreamed of a blue stone on a threshold and of a girl opening a window. Summer sloped toward autumn, though slowly, as if Iceland were reluctant to admit the calendar applied to it. The nights learned darkness again in increments. Emil worked. He took commission's modest ones and finished them in a way that felt different from the way he had finished anything before. He listened longer to the first cuts and faster to the last polish. He carved not what he thought he should carve, but what the rock asked to show. Word spread. There was a new patience in his work, a gaze. People came to the workshop with stones from their father's field, from an old breakwater, from a garden where a child had once fallen and not been hurt. "Can you make this into something that remembers itself?" they asked. He could. He saw Bjorn only once that autumn. The man arrived alone, hat in hand, an old-fashioned courtesy that looked right on him. He told Emil that his daughter, whose name was Lara, had been sleeping with the window open. The sea came in and went out the way the sea does. Her episodes had dwindled like a candle allowed to go out naturally. One morning they had found a small blue stone on the threshold, the size of a pea, smooth as if the sea had kept it in its mouth. Lara kept it in a little dish by the bed. "Faith finds anchors," Bjorn said simply. "Sometimes it finds stones." He hesitated. "I've brought the payment for the commission I didn't let you complete, and something for your trouble." He held up an envelope as if it were a fragile thing that might cry. "Consider it recompense." Emil took the envelope because refusing would have refuted not the money, but the apology in it. "I'm glad about Lara," he said, "because that was the core." "So am I." Bjorn looked around the workshop as if introducing himself to it. "There's a society fundraiser next month. I thought I would not attend. Now I think I will. It seems there will be room at our table again." He shook Emil's hand, a simple, firm human shake, and left. When the first hard frost came, Reykjavik glittered in mid-morning like a town invented by a patient child with too much sugar. Emil bought good boots. He visited Thingvellir once more and returned the empty jar to a crack with a thank you that broke into fog before his face. He waited for the winter sun. It came on a morning when the sky was a sheet of gray paper and a pale edge of gold wrote itself along the sea. He felt the call before he heard any sound. It was like someone tapping the rim of a glass with a fork from 2 rooms away, a clear bell under other noises. He put on his coat and did not bother with gloves. He knew he would not need them. He drove to the mountain. The trail was slick, but his feet found dry places as if someone had marked them. The amphitheater of basalt columns held a small pond of light in its center. He stood at the edge of it and said nothing. It seemed both too much and too little to say a name into such a morning. The seam opened like a careful eye. Asa stepped out. She was not light now, but body thin with long confinement, strong the way new growth is strong. The circlet of fern was not visible, but something in the way her hair held itself suggested a crown learned and laid aside. Her eyes were still river-colored. They found him, then took him in with a detail that warmed places in him he had not known were cold. "I wondered if you would come," she said, and there was a laugh buried in the line like a seashell in sand. "You told me to listen," he said. "I listened." They walked the length of the amphitheater without speaking. The sound of their boots on the stone felt like a sentence that did not need verbs. At the edge, Asa stopped and looked up the slope where the snow lay untroubled. "You gave the mountain 2 things," she said. "The first it took gladly. The second it took carefully." "I can't remember the first time I was ever truly alone," he said. "It's as if my life has a seam sewn into it now where 2 pieces used to be. I keep touching the seam and it is smooth." And Jon, he shook his head. "There is a kindness with no face. I do not know if that is better or worse." "It is different," she said. "Different is not a measure. It is a direction." They stood there long enough to learn each other's silences. Then Asa held out her hand. He took it. It felt like holding the smooth side of a stone found in a river, cool, but a cool that knew warmth by its absence. "Walk," she said, "if you have the time. I have a little now." They climbed. The wind took hold of their hair and convinced it of new arrangements. The city shrank to a toy. The sea grew to something older than either of them could accept as fully understood. She told him in pieces of the halls rebuilt of a cousin found who had been a whisper in another stone and was now a woman again, who had learned to bake bread. He told her in pieces of a man who had learned to be less alone. At a ridge they sat with their feet hanging over and ate bread and cheese from Emil's bag. Asa chewed with a seriousness that made him laugh. "It has been a while since food served as anything but memory," she said. "I had forgotten how important the jaw is to joy. Put that on a tavern sign." They watched a white-tailed eagle unspool itself against the sky. "Your guardians are in good health," she said. "The Landvetir," she nodded. "They are pleased. You brought back a piece that did not want to be away. The island does not need to push to keep balance in that place now. It can rest its shoulder." "Do you live there always?" he asked, nodding vaguely toward the idea of the seam. "Or can you visit often? I can stand in both doors now," she said. "Not always. Not for long. But more than never." She looked at him sidelong. "Do you want me to?" He surprised himself by not answering quickly. He considered the shape of his life, the curve of his days around work, and small human kindnesses, the way he had begun to say hello to neighbors on purpose. He pictured that life with a new thing in it, a woman who sometimes stepped out of a seam in the air and ate bread with intense attention. He pictured it with the absence of that new thing. The first picture felt complicated and real. The second felt simple and thin. "Yes," he said finally. "Come often enough that I begin to expect you, and then forget to expect you, and am glad both times." She smiled with her eyes first, then with her mouth. "I can do that." They descended slowly. At the amphitheater's edge, she stopped and turned to face him fully. "I cannot promise things humans usually ask for," she said. "I do not know if I can grow old beside you, or if old is a thing I will ever be again. But I can promise a call when the sky makes a ribbon. I can promise a door when your hands forget what they know and need to learn again. I can promise to answer if you ask instead of strike." He nodded. "I will ask." She took his left hand again, the one with the scar, and the heat woke under her lips, where she had marked him months ago. "Your hands will not tire as easily," she said. "That is a small thing I can give. Not magic. Memory. Of how it felt to shape stone from the inside." He felt a breath of ease move into the tendons like a thread pulled through cloth. "And for me," she added, "keep a bowl of salt by your door. I like the thought that I can leave a wet thumbprint where I want to be remembered." He laughed. "Consider it brined." She stepped back. The seam brightened like a page being held up to a window. She paused then, a little awkward, as if they had reached the moment people reach at the end of a visit, when no one wants to be the first to stand. "Go," he said softly, "before the mountain changes its mind." "The mountain never changes its mind," she said. "It merely waits for ours to." She went. The seam thinned to a line and then to nothing. The amphitheater became only a place again where weather happened. Emil stood until his knees complained, then walked down. Winter wrote itself across the city. The harbor filled with ice like an argument the sea meant to win later. Emil's workshop stayed warm, not from a new stove, but from the understanding that warmth could be a kind of listening. He carved. People came and left and came again with friends. They told him the stories of their stones and asked him to keep the stories intact in the shape he made. He did what he could. Sometimes at night, a ribbon of green would pull itself across the sky like a thought unrolling. On such nights, if he held a glass of water to the light and listened, he could hear a bell so small it slipped between the bones of the ear and rang in the throat. On those nights, he would put on his coat without gloves and step into the street. He would walk to the water. He would find Asa on the wind, where the waves whispered against the breakwater. They didn't always speak. Often they did. He learned that love could be large without being constant present, without being daily. He learned that absence, when it has a door in it, is only another room in the same house. He never once tried to carve her face. He knew better than to try to trap a person he wanted free. But sometimes he carved a circlet that was only the idea of fern, and put it where a hand would find it, and think, I know this, though I do not know from where. He carved animals with muscles caught in the act of changing their minds. He carved a window and sold it to a man who put it on a wall with no view and said it made the room feel honest. He kept a bowl of salt by the door. Once late winter there was a damp thumbprint in it. He smiled for 3 days at nothing anyone else could see. Sometimes he reached for Jon's face and found only the warmth of being told there was nothing wrong with him, that listening couldn't make right. He didn't stop reaching. The grief did not stop entirely. But it changed work. It became wood grain in the table part of the thing, not the whole thing. In spring, when the ice went out in a hurry, as if it had somewhere more important to be, a small parcel arrived with no return address. Inside lay a pea-sized blue stone, smooth as water. He set it in a shallow dish by his bed. He slept with the window open. The sea came and went. Once in summer he found a little girl and her father standing in the doorway of the workshop. The girl had a narrow chest and bright eyes. She kept one hand on a dish her father carried, as if it were a bird she wanted to keep calm. "Hello," she said, with the grave cheer of the very young and the very mended. "I'm Lara. I brought you a thing that helps breathing." The dish held 3 pebbles each the color of rain. Emil crouched so their faces were level. "Thank you," he said. "I will put them where the air goes in." Her father Bjorn met Emil's gaze over the child's head. The look they exchanged was simple and very complicated. It said in the language of men who had once fought on the same side without meaning to, "We did a hard thing. We will carry the light result." At midsummer the city stayed awake again. Emil stood in the door of his workshop and watched 2 teenagers run down the street holding hands, lit by a sun that refused to leave. He thought how endings had sounded to him once like doors shutting. Now they sounded like doors opening into different rooms of the same house. He picked up his tools. He set a new block on the stand. He touched his thumb to the scar where her lips had placed memory. He began to carve the world as if it could answer back. And sometimes in the long silver hour when Reykjavik forgets how to sleep, he heard a whisper in stone that was not a plea, but a greeting. Emil the summer night said like a friend opening a gate. "Are you awake?" "Yes." He would answer, smiling into the grain. "I'm listening."